Start. Okay. So 449 AD. So the early British lit time period, and this is also in your notes, is 449 AD, 450, I'll accept, to 1066 AD. So anytime I'm going to ask you about like the Anglo-Saxon time period, this is also a time period known as Old English, because that is the language that was spoken, referred to as OE, Old English. These two things are going to play a great deal of importance in understanding this time period, is that it is a very different time period in the formation of England and Europe as we know it. So, the fall of, anyone ever heard of Hadrian's Wall in England? Okay, anyone even know where England is on a map? Okay, let's start there. All right, if you look up a map of England, you will find it's an island country and it's pretty small actually. And part of it is taken up by Scotland. It's considered to be the UK, United Kingdom now, but that unification for England does not happen until the Act of Union in 1707. Okay, so it took a long time to get to the United Kingdom, as you know, and that also included Ireland, although they didn't like it and fought for another 200 years. But that would be, contentious Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, because that's where we get the term Anglo-Saxon from. Anglo-Saxon is a term used to describe this time period because that's who gets to rule. Whoever rules writes history. Just letting you know that. Winners get to write the history. So, Anglo-Saxons and Jutes are the three major tribes. When the fall of the Roman Empire happens, then you no longer have a central army that's going to be defending what was known as England, Angleland, and that's where we get the term England from, because of Angles, which was the dominant tribe. And these actually came over from the Scandinavian countries. Not Vikings per se, but Denmark. Anyone know where Denmark is? I suggest you look up a European map. In fact, you can go ahead and pull that up on your computer right now. Because usually if I end up drawing this, it just looks very wonky. So Denmark, or the Danes, they were tribes. They were tribes based upon what people always get it confused with Vikings, but they're not the same. Okay, they're a different group of people. They have different traditions. In fact, there's been lots of archaeology that's talked about, these types of societies in the last 100 years, 150 years since Sutton Hoo. That's why I have the links on your computer showing you different things from Sutton Hoo. So the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes come over because they're like, hey, there's some land for taking. The central force has gone back to Rome pretty much because, when your empire falls, you kind of want to go home and, protect Rome, the city. So you have England, little island here. Of course, Ireland's over here. And you have what's called Hadrian's Wall. It's Scotland. There's all these islands, little islands up here too. And then you have the coast of Europe. And at the top of Europe, before you get to like Norway and Sweden, there's this little place called Denmark. Okay, and it's right across from some other places. And there's lots of, if you think of fjords, anyone know what a fjord is? Yes?
I believe it's Icicle Lake or something.
Okay. They're like canyons between like peninsulas, okay? Because Denmark's pretty much like a peninsula coming up. And so the fjord is what they would call that water in between those areas. And it's still part of the sea, like the North Sea, if you want to call it that, and it's cold. Let's just go with that. It's cold. So the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes were up in these areas, Jutes, Angles, Saxons, etc. And they're considered to be Germanic tribes because their language was basically Germanic. And that's a large group of languages at that time. It would a modern German person cannot understand anything an Old English person would say, because Old English is kind of a lost language. Anyone familiar with the Lord of the Rings series? Okay, seeing that. Okay, the Riders of Rohan are based upon Tolkien's study of Old English, because that's what he taught. He was a person who was trying to figure out what the runes sounded like. And those runes were like the language marks they had. And no one really knows. Kind of like no one really knows what a Latin originally sounded like, because it's been a dead language for a very long time. Because it's not, once it's not spoken, you lose the sounds. You might still have symbols to represent it. Like no one's going to speak ancient Egyptian because they don't know how it sounded. It's not a phonetically language. Anytime that you have what's called a pictograph language, which is like what ancient Egyptian was, runes are, they are Japanese, Oriental languages are all pictograph languages. What we have is a phonetic language, meaning that we have certain letters that represent certain sounds, and that's how we put our words together. Whereas pictograph languages, you have a certain picture, and that is a word. And so once people no longer speak it out loud, you don't know what sound that picture represented. Whereas when you have a phonetic language, you can get a phonetic sound from the way the letters are put together. Okay, does that make sense? Anyone studied languages at all and know that we have two major kind of language groups, the pictograph ones as far as writing is concerned, and then the phonetic one. And that's it's called phonetic language. And as PH, it's based upon the idea of phonemes, but it actually is because the Phoenicians are the ones who originally developed it. So we have a Phoenician alphabet. Our numbers, 1, 2, is an Arabic numeric system. Okay, so just by what you're talking about and the words that we have, I can probably tell you the origin. That was Greek in origin, that was Latin in origin, etc. So you have to understand languages and study languages to understand what history is representing. Language represents history and migrations of people. It just does. And it changes with those. And so this is one of the things that we will be studying in early British Lit, is also the development of language, the development of the qualities that we, especially in America, value. Okay, because our society is much more like the early Old English Anglo-Saxons and their values than what came after that, when the Normans came in 1066. That's why the ending of this time period is 1066, because the Normans came from a little place called Normandy. Okay, if you're looking at your map, that's Upper France. Okay, but it was its own kingdom, if you want to call it, and it changed a lot of things about it. But it was the grandson of the former king of England, and it was really just a family feud. If you really start studying history, you'll find a lot of these wars are just stinking family feuds. Okay, World War I. Okay. The person who was the Kaiser of Germany was the nephew of the King of England. Okay. So you have to kind of realize that there's a whole history here that people don't really talk about. They talk about dates and they talk about wars, but I'm just like, you know what? If you'd stop fighting in your family, maybe we could have a little bit of world peace here. That would work. But oh well. How many of you have brothers and sisters? How many of you fight with your sister or your brother? All right, so what hope do we have? No, I'm just kidding. All right. So when you have the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes coming over to England, and they settle in different places, and they come in like here, blah, blah, blah. And so they all have a very basic Germanic language. Well, the first tale we're going to be reading from this time period is the story of Beowulf. Okay. And it's actually a story they bring with them from what would be considered to be modern day Denmark. So when the setting and when all these things are happening, it's not set in England. It got written down in England about 300, 400 years after they came by a monk. Okay? And so we have this history that's really dealing with Denmark and dealing with this, but it is a very famous tale. And we know that it's a famous tale from there because some of the kings and queens and stuff that they reference are real kings and queens who we know existed and who ruled certain time periods. So that's how we know how old this tale probably is, because a couple of the kings and queens mentioned in there were 500 AD. Okay, so this is a tale that is considered Old English. It's considered a British lit tale, but it actually is not set in Great Britain or in England, if you want to call it that. Okay, so don't forget that, because when it starts talking about icy and snowy and all of these great gigantic cliffs and crags and all this stuff, it's not describing the geography so much of England here. It's describing Denmark, which would have been a cold, icy, well-ridden place. Now, to know, anyone ever heard of the Titanic? Okay, it sank in the North Seas. And so icebergs are part of that. And so that would be stuff they would be navigating and going through. Okay, so that's why I always have to say, here's your setting, this is where we're going to be going to, and this is what we're going to set up. Now, there are certain characteristics of the values during this time period. I guess would be, I have it listed on your Moodle, if you look in Moodle, and it says Anglo-Saxon qualities. Do you see that? Like society qualities, it should be under week 1. Just making sure everyone can access the same thing. Except for you, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't get it down.
Oh, did you get in? Okay, good. Yeah, the first one is reverence for womanhood. And this is exemplified in the story Beowulf and some of the other tales that they had during this time period. They loved riddles. They loved word games. They loved very descriptive language, and we'll talk about that in the qualities of their poetry. So what's the second, another characteristic? Love for freedom. They were very independent. They did not want to be ruled by a overlord per se. The person who was the thane, that's what they would call their leader. We would call it like a king, but they were always like clans. They were related oftentimes by blood or by just the common need for survival, because you're in a very cold, dark place. If you know anything about Northern Europe, close to Scandinavia, etc., and I mean like Norway and Sweden, etc., how much light do you have when it's winter? You have very little. So it's cold and dark a lot of times. And so you better like the people you're going to be stuck inside with for a long time. Okay, you just better. And so once you could get out, it was the freedom, and this love of freedom and this love of independence is very inherent in their nature, and it's reflected in their literature. How do we come up with these ideas about society? Well, we read the literature and find out what has been celebrated in that society. And it's one of the things that's so important about Beowulf is not just important as an early English tale, it's also important as a social document, because it gives you a great deal of insight into what the people valued, because it takes a long time to make a poem. It takes a long time to sing it. And this was originally an oral tale that was told out loud, and then it got written down. So if it's going to be important enough to use very expensive paper, very expensive ink, etc., to record, then it's going to have to be kind of like the height of your society. And we'll talk about a central theme to it as well. What's another aspect? Go ahead and read it. It's on the list. It's there for you. Appreciation for nature. Even in a sterner moods, meaning they're fine, they'll talk about the beautiful hail coming down, the beautiful, icebergs that are floating by, the slithering sea monsters. Okay. And so you're going to like, well, that's interesting that you have so much of an appreciation for nature. You're going to describe the good, the bad, and the ugly, as well as, those things which the flight of the bird, etc. All right. And this is also representing their iconography. I'll talk about what iconography is as well. What's another one? Okay, love of freedom. Beyond that? Yes, this is the role of a good king. When your society is established around a good thane or king, the ability to maintain your society is very much dependent upon the one person. And so Beowulf, the actual story, is an exploration of what makes a good king in this society, and pretty much in any society. And this is a warrior society, if you want to call it that, meaning that you're not only fighting nature, you're going to be fighting other clans, you're going to be fighting just to survive a lot of times because you're in cold, dark, sailing on open oceans, etc. Right. And storms can come up. All these things are against you. Everything's trying to kill you, pretty much. Okay. So when you start understanding what they value as a warrior society, it's a really eye-opening experience reading Beowulf. And I'm giving you these qualities so that when you're reading Beowulf, you can find these qualities. Because we don't just sit around and say, hey, let's come up with some random qualities for the society and see if we can find them in the literature. No. You read the literature and then you're like, wow, these are common things that keep happening that from a certain time period when things are produced. Okay. And then you come up with common qualities, etc. Okay, what's another quality? Yes, devotion to glory as a way of becoming immortal. They did not have a religious system per se because they really just thought your best bet for immortality was to have your name remembered, to do great heroic deeds, to have that immortality of your name and of your deeds and of your line, etc. Okay. And so they also, though, had what's called a belief in weird or fate. The easiest way to think about it is to think of it as fate, but it was called WYRD. And it was you can't even say it's a goddess. It's just the idea that what will be, will be. You can't escape your fate. Although you can make the best of the time you have here. It's not fatalistic, meaning eat, drink, and tomorrow you die. As in, we don't have to try, we don't have to do anything, because then it would be competing with the idea that you want to be famous, but you want to be famous for good things. And so we're going to have to talk about what they meant by good things. All right. So what's the other one? There should be one more. Yes, this is right back to the whole idea that you are, as an individual, very valued because you value independence, but you also are an individual who's supposed to contribute greatly to society, meaning to continuing the survival of your clan. Thus, betrayal is a huge deal. Any type of lying is a big deal, because if you're living in a very closed, tight society, you've got to be able to trust other people. And once you set yourself up as a betrayer or as a liar, that's going to taint everything you do from then on out. Anyone in here have been lied to by a good friend? Okay, do you trust them the same? How many of you have lied to your parents? Okay, what happened when they found out? Okay, what was part of that upset? Betrayal. Because now they can no longer trust you. Now they have to question everything that you tell them. And you still have to live with that person, right? Okay, and so that is kind of where they are, because a lot of them were related. And so if you couldn't trust the other person who's laying down on the other side of the mat, okay, they don't have your back. Okay. So it's a very big deal in this type of society. And you'll find that is going to be rehearsed and hit upon again and again in the story of Beowulf and in the Seafarer, which is another thing that we'll be looking at doing. Is it that little electronic monster? I love that thing. Not. All right. It chases me, I swear. So when you start talking about these qualities, the whole purpose of understanding them is to understand, are we very much like them? Do we have a great need for independence? Do we understand the role of the individual? Okay, and they also were very much in property rights. If you are living very close to somebody and suddenly something goes missing, how many of you have accused your brother or your sister of, like, taking your, right? Okay, we've all done it. And sometimes you were right, okay? And other times you weren't, okay? Most of the time I'm right, so we'll go with that. But at the same time, you have to respect privacy boundaries. Does that make sense? That's why even today, we don't live in walled houses, right? Do you have a wall around your house? I have a fence because I have horses, but it's not, my fence isn't going to keep anything out. Just keeps them in. Right? And so when you perpetuate the respect for individuals' property, meaning I don't have to put up a sign that says no trespassing because other people should respect those boundaries. Okay. That's why we can paint a little purple thing on a tree, and because I live in the country and 10.5 acres. And that means what? That's my boundary marker, and it means no hunting. That's what it means. When you live out in the middle of 500 acres or whatever, you kind of have to put the boundary because you don't know if you're trekking through the woods when you suddenly step into somebody else's place. But then you notice it and they back off, or they'll come to your door and ask if it's okay. Okay. And that's just the rules of living out in the country, respecting other people's private property. Okay. And that is something that we've handed down in a society to say, hey, I should be able to walk off. And I mean, in the country, when you're really out on acreage, you just leave the keys in your old farm truck. You leave the keys in the tractor. Number one, no one can run away in a tractor. And you can walk faster than that tractor can go. I'm just saying, okay? And if you can get the farm truck to start, good. Because you did better than we did. It's still sitting there for a reason. No, not totally. But it's a respect for property. It's not there for someone to walk off with. And this is just a idea that is very Anglo-Saxon, is that if I set this down and my sword's sitting right here, etc., it should still be sitting here and no one has touched it. Okay. And that's why how many of your parents harp on that? Stop touching your brother's stuff. Don't take it. Okay. Because it starts. I mean, it does. The hardest thing to do is to keep your hands off of something that's there all the time with somebody that you're around all the time.
Is that specifically Anglo-Saxon, or is it just like human nature?
It is very Anglo-Saxon in the fact that we don't have to wall things. Most of their wall stuff was to keep like bears and stuff out, or rival clans. But within a clan, it does occur in other societies. Japan's very much like that. But there's also places where, the idea is if you can take it, it's yours. And those are societies in which you will find a lot of walled and fences and guards, because that's a disestablishment of society. I mean, it's become chaos. If you perpetuate that, it's very hard to live in a society because people are not respecting your boundaries. They're not respecting your ownership. They're not respecting your property. Okay, does that make sense? And so that's the difference between having a responsible society and one that descends more into chaos and take it like what we call the Wild Wild West. Okay, anyone seen Chronicles of Riddick? If you kill it, you keep it. Yeah, you guys need to watch more movies. Oops.